The 14-year-old who forged papers to join the Marines and saved 3 lives. Imagine being 14 years old. Most kids that age are in 9th grade, worried about homework and after-school activities. But you're different. You forge your mother's signature on enlistment papers, lie to recruiters about your age, and join the United States Marine Corps. They send you to Hawaii to drive trucks, but that's not good enough. You want to fight. So you go AWOL, sneak onto a combat transport ship heading to Iwo Jima, and hide among the cargo until you're discovered mid-ocean. When they find you, you volunteer to fight rather than face desertion charges. 6 days after your 17th birthday, 2 Japanese grenades land in your trench. Your rifle is jammed. Your 3 buddies can't react in time. So you scream, "Grenade!" Throw one man aside, dive on top of one grenade, and pull the other one underneath your body. The explosion sends 250 pieces of shrapnel through your torso, face, and arms. You should be dead. But 8 months later, you're standing at the White House while President Harry Truman places the Medal of Honor around your neck. You're 17 years old, the youngest Marine ever to receive America's highest military decoration. This isn't fiction. This is the true story of Jacqueline Harold Lucas, the boy who refused to wait his turn to serve, the Marine who survived the unsurvivable, and the man who lived to tell one of the most incredible stories in American military history. By the end of this video, you'll discover how a kid from North Carolina became a legend, why both his parachutes failed years later and he still survived, and what President Truman really said when he gave Jack that medal. Stay with me, because Jack Lucas's story will show you what it means to have courage beyond your years. Part 1. The Tough Kid: Childhood and Forging Papers. The story of Jacqueline Harold Lucas begins on February 14, 1928, Valentine's Day, in Plymouth, North Carolina. Jack was a big kid, taller and heavier than most boys his age, with a frame that made him look older than he was. Jack's early years were marked by tragedy. When he was just 11 years old, his father died. Jack later said, "I became kind of a tough kid after that to handle." His mother struggled to control him. He got into fights at school. He talked back to teachers. He was angry, restless, and looking for somewhere to direct that energy. His mother sent him to Edwards Military Institute, a military boarding school, hoping the discipline and structure would straighten him out. Jack actually thrived there. He loved the military drills, the physical training, the sense of purpose. For the first time in years, Jack felt like he belonged somewhere. Then came December 7, 1941. Jack was 13 years old, sitting in the common room at Edwards Military Institute when news came over the radio. Japan had attacked Pearl Harbor. The United States was at war. Jack was electrified. He watched as older boys from the school graduated and enlisted. He read newspapers obsessively, following the war's progress. He saw photographs of Marines landing on Pacific Islands, fighting the Japanese. And Jack made a decision. He was going to join the United States Marine Corps. He didn't care that he was only 13. He would find a way. In August 1942, when Jack was 14 years old, he executed his plan. He found a notary public and bribed him to create false birth documents showing that Jack was born in 1925, not 1928. Then Jack forged his mother's signature on the parental consent form required for 17-year-olds to enlist. Jack walked into a Marine Corps recruiting office and presented his papers. The recruiters looked at this big kid, over 6 feet tall, well over 200 pounds, and believed him. They didn't question his age. Jack was accepted into the United States Marine Corps. He was 14 years old. Jack was sent to Parris Island, South Carolina for boot camp. The drill instructors there were legendary for their brutality, pushing recruits to their absolute limits. But Jack loved it. He thrived under the pressure. He excelled in physical training. He qualified as an expert rifleman, and no one suspected he was only 14. After boot camp, Jack was assigned to the 6th Base Depot of V Amphibious Corps and sent to Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. But there was a problem. Someone in the Marine Corps bureaucracy reviewed Jack's records and realized something was wrong. They did the math on his supposed birth year and compared it to when he supposedly graduated from school. It didn't add up. The Marines discovered that Jack Lucas was only 15 years old. Under normal circumstances, Jack would have been immediately discharged, but it was wartime. The Marines needed every man they could get, and Jack had completed boot camp and qualified as a rifleman. So instead of kicking him out, they reassigned him. Jack was given a new job: truck driver. Safe, far from combat. Exactly what Jack didn't want. Part 2. The Rebel. Court-martial and going AWOL. Jack Lucas hated driving trucks. He hadn't joined the Marines to sit in Hawaii delivering supplies. He had joined to fight. He wanted to be on the front lines, facing the Japanese, avenging Pearl Harbor. Jack became angry and frustrated. He got into fights with other Marines. His temper, which was always short, became explosive. He punched a sergeant during an argument. That was the last straw. Jack was court-martialed and sentenced to 5 months in the brig, military prison. He spent those months breaking rocks on a chain gang, eating bread and water, trying to work off his sentence. The Marines hoped it would break his spirit, make him more obedient. It didn't. When Jack was released from the brig in late 1944, he went back to truck duty. But by then, the war in the Pacific was reaching a critical phase. American forces were preparing to invade Iwo Jima, a small volcanic island just 750 miles from Tokyo. Taking Iwo Jima would give American bombers a critical airbase for raids on Japan's home islands. Jack knew about the invasion. He heard Marines talking about it. He saw units preparing to ship out. And Jack made a decision. He was going to Iwo Jima, whether the Marines wanted him there or not. On January 10, 1945, Jack walked out of his camp. He took nothing with him except his boots and his fatigues. He left behind his ID, his orders, everything. He was officially absent without leave, AWOL. If he was caught, he could be charged with desertion and face a court-martial, possibly even execution. But Jack didn't care. He made his way to the docks at Pearl Harbor and found the USS Duel, APA-160, a transport ship being loaded with supplies and Marines for the Iwo Jima invasion. Jack walked onto the ship in broad daylight, acting like he belonged there. No one stopped him. He found a storage compartment below decks, squeezed himself among the cargo, and hid until he was discovered mid-ocean. The USS Duel left port on January 11, 1945. Jack was on board, stowed away like contraband, heading toward the most brutal battle in Marine Corps history. Part 3. Discovered and Adopted. The Voyage to Iwo Jima. For days, Jack hid below decks on the USS Duel. He emerged only at night to steal food and water. But Jack knew he couldn't hide forever. Once the ship reached Iwo Jima and Marines started unloading, he would be discovered. And if he was discovered as a stowaway after 30 days of being AWOL, he would be charged with desertion. So Jack made a calculation. He waited until just before the 30-day mark, then turned himself in. Jack walked up to an officer on deck and said, "Sir, I'm Private First Class Jacqueline Lucas. I'm AWOL from my unit in Hawaii. I want to volunteer for combat." The officer stared at him in disbelief. Marines don't stow away on combat ships. Marines don't volunteer to join an invasion force mid-ocean. This was insane. But the officer took Jack to Captain Robert Dunlap, commanding officer of Company C, 1st Battalion, 26th Marines, 5th Marine Division. Captain Dunlap interviewed Jack and quickly realized several things. First, this kid was serious. He genuinely wanted to fight. Second, the invasion was days away. They didn't have time to send Jack back to Hawaii. Third, they were short on riflemen. Every man counted. Captain Dunlap made a decision. He adopted Jack into his company. Jack was no longer a deserter. He was a Marine rifleman assigned to Fox Company. The AWOL notation would remain on his record, but for now, Jack would fight. On February 14, 1945, Jack celebrated his 17th birthday aboard the USS Duel. He was finally going to get what he wanted,
combat. 5 days later, on February 19, 1945, the USS Deneull reached Iwo Jima. Part 4. Iwo Jima, D-Day, the beach landing. Iwo Jima is only 8 square miles of volcanic rock, ash, and black sand, but it's one of the most heavily fortified places on Earth. Over 21,000 Japanese soldiers are dug into a network of caves, tunnels, and concrete bunkers, and they've been preparing for this invasion for months. On the morning of February 19, 1945, Jack Lucas climbed down cargo nets into a landing craft. All around him, Marines were quiet, pale, praying. Many of them knew they wouldn't survive the day. First-day casualties in amphibious assaults were always catastrophic. The landing craft headed toward the beach. Japanese artillery opened fire. Shells exploded in the water. One landing craft next to Jack's took a direct hit and disintegrated. Men in metal flew into the air. Jack's landing craft reached the beach. The ramp dropped. Marines charged forward. Jack ran across black volcanic sand that sucked at his boots like quicksand. Explosions threw up geysers of sand. Men fell all around him. Jack made it off the beach. He was alive. He had survived D-Day. Later, Jack would say he was grateful he hadn't been in the first assault wave. On D-Day alone, 2,400 Americans were killed or wounded. The casualties were so high that bodies were piled on the beach. But Jack's war was just beginning. Part 5. February 20th, 1945. D-Day +1. On the morning of February 20th, 1945, D-Day +1, Jack Lucas and 3 other Marines were assigned to a reconnaissance patrol. Their mission was to advance toward Airfield No. 1, one of Iwo Jima's 3 airstrips, and scout enemy positions. The 4 Marines moved carefully through a ravine, a twisting, treacherous pathway surrounded by high ground. It was the perfect place for an ambush, and that's exactly what happened. Without warning, 11 Japanese soldiers appeared and opened fire. Bullets tore through the air. The 4 Marines dove for cover, jumping into a trench, but there was another trench running parallel just a few feet away, and that trench was full of Japanese soldiers. The 2 sides were so close they could almost reach out and touch each other. Gunfire erupted from both trenches. Chaos, screaming, the smell of gunpowder and blood. Jack raised his M1 Garand rifle and fired. He hit 2 Japanese soldiers. Then his rifle jammed. Jack cursed, bent over, and tried to clear the jam. That's when he saw them. 2 Japanese grenades had been thrown into the American trench. They landed right in front of Jack and his 3 buddies. Both grenades were live, pins pulled, fuses burning. They would explode in seconds. Jack screamed, "Grenade!" One of the other Marines, frozen in fear, didn't move. Jack shoved him aside. Then, without hesitation, Jack threw himself on top of one grenade and reached out with his other arm, grabbing the second grenade and pulling it underneath his body. Jack pressed both grenades into the black volcanic sand as hard as he could, using his own body as a shield to absorb the blast. One grenade exploded. The force of the explosion threw Jack into the air. Over 250 pieces of red-hot shrapnel tore through his body. His torso was shredded. His face was torn open. His arms were full of shrapnel. His thighs were ripped apart. Jack hit the ground hard. He was conscious. He could feel everything. The pain was beyond description. He tried to scream, but couldn't make a sound. Blood poured from dozens of wounds. The other Marines, thinking Jack was dead, scrambled out of the trench and continued their assault on the enemy position. Jack lay there, unable to move, unable to call for help, bleeding out in a trench on Iwo Jima. Then, by pure chance, another Marine passed by the trench. He looked down and saw Jack's body. He was about to keep moving when he noticed something. Jack's eyes were open. He was alive. The Marine shouted for a courseman.
Part 6. Survival against the odds. 26 surgeries and recovery. Navy corpsmen rushed to Jack and began emergency treatment. They couldn't believe he was still alive. No one survives 2 grenade blasts at point-blank range.
But Jack Lucas wasn't dead. He was conscious, aware, and in unimaginable agony. Stretcher bearers carried Jack to the beach. He had to wait there until nightfall before being evacuated. During daylight, Japanese artillery would target any boat leaving the shore. Jack lay on the black sand for hours, bleeding, in pain, waiting. Finally, after dark, Jack was loaded onto a boat and taken to the hospital ship USS Samaritan, AH-10. Surgeons examined him and shook their heads. They counted over 250 pieces of shrapnel embedded in Jack's body. His chest, abdomen, face, arms, and legs were full of metal fragments. Some pieces were so deep they couldn't be removed without causing more damage. Surgeons operated immediately. It was the first of what would eventually be 26 surgeries over the next several months. They removed as much shrapnel as they could, but about 200 pieces remained embedded in Jack's body for the rest of his life. For weeks, Jack hovered between life and death. Infection was a constant threat. His wounds were slow to heal. But Jack was young, strong, and stubborn. He refused to die. Slowly, painfully, Jack began to recover. Physical therapy allowed him to regain the use of his arms, though his mobility would never be the same. On September 18, 1945, Jack was medically discharged from the Marine Corps due to his injuries. But before he left, the Marines did something remarkable. They removed all mention of his AWOL status from his records. As far as the official record was concerned, Jack Lucas had never deserted. He had been a Marine in good standing from the day he enlisted. Then, on October 5, 1945, Jack traveled to Washington, D.C. for a ceremony at the White House. Part 7. The Medal. Meeting President Truman. On the South Lawn of the White House, President Harry S. Truman presented the Medal of Honor to 27 servicemen who had fought at Iwo Jima. 14 of the recipients were posthumous. The men had died, earning their medals. Among the living recipients were Private First Class Jacqueline Lucas, age 17, and Captain Robert Dunlap, the officer who had adopted Jack into his company aboard the USS Duel. When Truman placed the Medal of Honor around Jack's neck, he looked at the young Marine and said, "I'd rather have this medal than be President of the United States." Jack later joked, "Of course I had to go home and see my girlfriend and get some lip sugar, but Mr. Truman called me and interrupted my plans there." Jacqueline Lucas was the youngest Marine ever to receive the Medal of Honor. He remains the youngest serviceman to receive it since the Civil War. Part 8. After the War. College, Army, and parachute failure. After the war, Jack tried to live a normal life. He enrolled at High Point University in North Carolina, earned a business degree, and joined the Pi Kappa Alpha fraternity. He tried his hand at business. He got married. But Jack couldn't shake the warrior inside him. In 1961, at age 33, Jack enlisted in the United States Army. Why? Because he wanted to conquer his fear of heights by becoming a paratrooper. Jack trained at the 82nd Airborne Division at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. During one training jump, something went wrong. Jack's main parachute failed to open properly. He pulled his reserve chute. It also failed. Jack was plummeting toward the ground with 2 malfunctioning parachutes. He should have died on impact, but Jack hit the ground, rolled, and walked away with only minor injuries. Witnesses couldn't believe it. Jack attributed his survival to his muscular build, his ability to roll on impact, and pure luck. Jack later said, "I'm indestructible." Jack served in the Army until 1965, rising to the rank of captain. He volunteered to serve in Vietnam, but was not allowed to deploy. The Army didn't want to risk losing a Medal of Honor recipient. Part 9. Final Years and Legacy. Jack Lucas lived a full life after his military service. He married, had children and grandchildren. He traveled the country, speaking to troops and veterans, sharing his story. In 1997, when the Navy christened the USS Iwo Jima LHD-7, Jack placed his Medal of Honor citation inside the ship's hull, where it remains sealed to this day. On June 5, 2008, Jack Lucas died of leukemia in a hospital in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. He was 80 years old. He was surrounded by family and friends. Jack Lucas lived 63 years after jumping on those 2 grenades. He outlived all the doctors who said he wouldn't survive. He outlived the shrapnel still embedded in his body. He outlived 2 parachute failures. He truly was indestructible. In 2016, the U.S. Navy announced that an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer would be named USS Jack H. Lucas, DDG-125. The ship was commissioned on October 7, 2023 in Tampa, Florida. It sails today, carrying Jack's name and his legacy. Conclusion. What can we learn from the life of Jack Lucas? First, that age is just a number. Jack was 14 when he enlisted, 17 when he earned the Medal of Honor. He didn't wait for permission to serve. He made it happen. Second, that courage isn't the absence of fear. Jack was terrified at Iwo Jima, but when those grenades landed, he didn't freeze, he acted. Third, that some people refuse to die. Jack survived 2 grenades, 250 pieces of shrapnel, 26 surgeries, and 2 parachute failures. He simply refused to give up. And finally, that true heroes are humble. Jack never bragged about his Medal of Honor. When asked about it, he simply said he did what any Marine would do. Jack Lucas forged papers to join the Marines at 14. He went AWOL to get into combat. He jumped on 2 grenades to save his friends, and he lived to tell the story for another 63 years. The Marine Corps has a saying, improvise, adapt, overcome. Jack Lucas embodied that saying. He refused to let anyone tell him he was too young, too injured, or too old to serve. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and share. We'll continue Day 6 with more incredible warrior stories. Until then, remember what Jack Lucas proved, that courage knows no age limit.